So I saw an interesting panel hosted by SAPE's Trust, considering solutions for the Zimbabwean crisis, and part of the framing of that solution was the reference to a national transitional authority. And I wanted to consider what exactly that means in terms of the constitutional implications, because in order to have a national transitional authority, you would need to change the constitution. The constitution, as it is currently framed, gives the reins of government to whoever wins the harmonized elections once every half a decade. And since that was done, it means people are saying, well, we need a different arrangement to deal with the crisis. It's very interesting when you think about it, because the inclusive government was framed in the same sort of, we need a vehicle to implement reforms that lead to a free and fair election. And for some reason, now people are hopeful that this transitional authority will be more successful than the inclusive government was. And for me, these are really questions of a constitutional reimagining of Zimbabwe, because people are talking of this arrangement. How is it introduced? How long does it last? What happens after the transitional authority? Do we come back to the same constitutional order, or do we permanently change it? These are very important questions for me when people talk about a transitional authority without grappling really with the constitutional realities. And it brings me to the question, well, why did we have a new constitution in 2013 if just 7 years later we are now saying we need to be changing fundamentally how we even think of government and take it away from the result of the election and have some sort of transitional authority? And let's remember the 1980 constitution, the Lancaster House constitution, that's an imposition by a departing colonial power. That's what the British were doing for everyone. They themselves, no codified constitution, but when they're granting independence, they dish out constitutions like confetti. And then ZANU-PF then remodels it for its own purposes. But what was the reason why people were clamoring for a new people-driven constitution? Because my understanding is that several activists, prominently Tawanda Mtasa, had a theory that in order to dislodge Robert Mugabe and ZANU-PF, you needed two things: a new political party and a new constitution. And this led to the formation of the MDC and the NCA. So these were supposed to be the strategy for removing Robert Mugabe. So with the MDC participating somewhat successfully in the 2000 elections, the NCA had also very successfully agitated government such that there was also a constitutional referendum. So new party, and then you have NCA leading to the agitation for a new constitution with the hope that it will lead to a new president. As we recall, in 1980, the Patriotic Front comes back with a new constitution, and we do get a new president. So there was the inability to get a new constitution until 2013. And so the old theory was the fact that, okay, we finally have a new constitution, and we have the MDC, so we have a new president, and that failed. So I would submit that was the first failure of the 2013 constitution. It was the failure to actually lead to a dislodging of Robert Mugabe and ZANU-PF, since this had been, to my understanding, the operating theory, right, that you needed a new constitution and a new party to deal with Mugabe, but Mugabe gets his new term. So that's the first failure. The second failure is for Robert Mugabe himself, right, because he fails to actually, the 2013 constitution fails to deliver for him even one complete term as a president. The Lancaster House constitution had two routinely renewed presidential terms for Mugabe, but he fails to see out just one. He fails. And that's the second failure of the 2013 constitution. The fact that ZANU-PF itself, as well as the military, they look at what's happening in the country, and they resort to extra legal, extra constitutional means to pressure the president to leave. And then what happens in 2017, in my view, is a failed coup. It's a failed coup. When the military moved on the president, if the president had resigned on that basis, one could have argued that a successful coup had happened. But Robert Mugabe, knowing that he held all the cards, refused to let go. Asante sana, my good people. And at that point, then people, if you recall before the Asante sana speech, so the military has moved in on him, he refuses to let go. People are called to the streets, come and have a massive demonstration to show that you don't want this president anymore. He still refuses to go, right? It's only when parliament is constituted in order to constitutionally remove him. So it's when people then trace their steps back and say, okay, the extra legal means have failed. Let's retrace to the constitution and kick him out by the book. then he resigns, right? Then he resigns. When the constitutional processes began, no one has turned up for his cabinet meeting, then he resigns. So that's like the constitution then coming back as an afterthought, right? It's an afterthought, and more or less parliament is now assisting in what I'm calling a failed coup in the context of what happens in 2017. Now, fast forward beyond 2018, because even Nelson Chamisa comes, he participates, fails to destroy ZANU-PF in terms of the 2013 constitution, and now people are talking about a national transitional authority. So these are all the failings of a constitution which was supposed to herald a new era, not just by listing extensive rights or independent institutions, but actually heralding real political change, which has not happened, which is why people are now looking to a national transitional authority. And so, is that National Transitional Authority part of this reimagining of our constitution in Zimbabwe? I'm not entirely certain. Because if you look, I was looking at the NCA draft constitution, and that's the difference really. If you look, the 2013 constitution in many ways facilitated continuities of the 1980 constitution as reimagined by ZANU-PF. They maintained the all-powerful president, for instance. And because of that, it's very difficult to hold that president to account. And now we're talking about a national transitional authority. If you look in terms of the NCA draft constitution, for instance, the prime minister is the one with executive authority. He's the one directly elected by the people. And then parliament elects the president, who is the one who is the head of state, commander-in-chief, signs all bills, ambassadors, and things like that. So just to give an example to actually animate what I'm talking about, in 2008, if the NCA draft constitution had been the constitution that was in force, it would have meant that Robert Mugabe, after winning that runoff, which was, entirely illegitimate, but that was the basis of his claim to be president. If he had won that runoff, he would have been prime minister with executive authority. But because the MDCs controlled parliament, they would have elected the president. So in 2008, we would have had no need for an amendment to facilitate the inclusive government, because there would have already been a coalition arrangement, because the reimagining of the executive in terms of the NCA draft constitution allows parliament to actually have its own president, and then you have the executive on the other hand. Because we have got a winner-take-all system, which was replicated in the 2013 constitution, people are talking now about a national transitional authority. So the real question is, what should we be doing in terms of this winner-take-all system? Is it delivering to us the sort of democratically accountable and responsive government that we want, or must we not be having serious conversations about that? Or should we just be sticking to a transitional arrangement and a transitional authority? Because the problem you have is talking about a national transitional authority when ZANU-PF is 2/3 in parliament. That's a very difficult arrangement to actually make workable, because ZANU-PF is the presidency, it is parliament, so it can still legislate, but it is a supermajority, it can change the constitution. So how do you make a transitional arrangement workable with a party which has got sufficient control of arms of the state that it can still continue to rule without any other party? That is the really fundamental question which torpedoes the idea of a national transitional authority. Broadly speaking, I would say we must be doing more to see how we can reimagine our body politic and ask seriously if the 2013 constitution is providing the answers that we want.